So again, good morning. This is Steve Kalina, President and CEO of the Minnesota Precision Manufacturing Association, MPMA. We hope that you, your family, and your businesses are all doing well as possible during these tough times. Our thoughts and prayers are with you all. We really appreciate that you're taking the time from your very busy schedule to join us. We know they're daily webinars, but we want to provide some content that is indeed pertinent to your business, but maybe not the same COVID-related topics that are everywhere right now. Right now, many companies have already seen their workload drop significantly, and focus is shifting to obtaining any sales possible, and of course, retaining any sales you have. Bob Asman is founder and CXO of Innovative CX Solutions, LLC. He is the immediate past chairman of the board of the Customer Experience Professionals Association, or CXPA. Bob has a wealth of diverse global operations and leadership experience as an executive at organizations such as Carlson Wagenly Travel, Thomson Reuters, Ceridian, and Deluxe Corporation. Bob earned both his MBA and bachelor's degrees from the University of St. Thomas and St. Paul. He's an adjunct professor at the Carlson School of Management, Supply Chain and Operations Management Department, and a senior guest lecturer at the Rutgers School of Business Executive Education Programs. Bob will help us understand the business value of customer experience, or CX, build a case for investing in CX initiatives, cover various measurements used to monitor CX results, and show us how to develop dashboards that cut across all functions of an organization, not just your points of contact. Bob?
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and thanks to Steve and Carlene and the MPMA for inviting me to talk with you today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And I'm coming to you today from beautiful Austin, Texas. It's a picture-perfect day down here, and we spend our summers in Wisconsin, so we're wondering when we'll be able to return to the fine state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, fine states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. So today I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey to talk about exactly what does an ROI mean for customer experience. And I'm specifically going to talk about with you more of a practical approach about CX investments. And I think this applies for B2B, B2C, and B2C organizations. At least in the past, when I've given these types of training or webinar sessions, everyone seems to be able to take a little bit from it and use it in whatever particular business environment they're in. So we'll talk a little bit about the business value of CX. I'll try to give you a couple of examples of the case for why we would invest in CX. And this is an interesting topic right now. And among CX professionals, there's a lot of discussion about investment in times of this crisis. But more importantly is how do we navigate through it so that customer experience is able to respond to changing customer requirements. I'll talk a little bit about the measurements we use around customer experience. Some of you may use these in your organizations already or be wondering what you should use. I'll give you a little flavor of all of those measurements. And then a combination of a dashboard and connecting of the dots, which I think is really, really important to be successful in not only talking about CX measurements, but talking about the whole company overall and how it's performing. If we just look at NPS, for example, Net Promoter Score or customer satisfaction, we're only looking at one little piece of the pie. And hopefully this dashboard that I show you will be able to be utilized within your places of business to give an entire picture about how your company is performing in response to customer expectations. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish in our next 45 minutes or so. So I want to begin kind of in a strange place. Some of you may wonder what I'm talking about, but some of you may recognize this individual. His name is Donald Rumsfeld. He is the former Secretary of Defense under Bush 1 and was instrumental in the Gulf War. And he had a kind of an affinity for toying with the press. And so in the interest of making sure the video would work properly, I'm going to play just the soundtrack. You don't really have to see him in person. at this press conference. It's just a short half a minute clip from a press conference. So I'll play this for you, and it'll be the way we kick off today's session. Give me 1 second.
There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between Baghdad and some of these terrorist organizations.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there's some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not
several unknowns. And
I'm not going to say which it is.
Mr. J.
You know, I'm right here. I'm right here.
So I think the best part about that video is when he goes through this and then says, I'm not going to tell you what it is. But let's talk about this for a minute. Donald Rumsfeld said the following things. Known knowns. There are things we know we know. Now you might be sitting there saying to yourselves, what does this have to do with an ROI of customer experience? What I'm suggesting to you is the starting point for this process is to identify exactly those things. What are the things that you know within your business? You know you have products, you know you have competition, you know you have markets and customers. Make a list as specific as you can of what are the known knowns within your business. Now, you may say that's pretty simple. And I'm not sure what benefit that, or I have that list, or right. But it's a starting point, because the next thing we're going to ask is, what are the known unknowns? So what are the things I know I don't know? So let's take the competition. I know I have competition, but I might not know exactly what that competition is going to do. Or I might not know that they're going to change their product line. So after you've gotten everything you know, you want to identify things you don't know and make that list. Now, these don't have to be 10 or 20 things on a list. In fact, I recommend against it. I'd say keep it to around 5 or so items, because this is an inventory of what you know. And then, of course, the last thing is that he said the unknown unknowns, and this is probably the most difficult one, because they are things we don't know. Now, the best way to put that in context for me has been to think about disruptors in your markets. So, for example, if you were a taxi cab company 10 years ago, did you know that the sharing economy was emerging, that companies like Uber and Lyft and others were going to emerge on the scene and dramatically impact your business? Now, you could argue maybe they knew about the sharing economy, but if they did, they certainly didn't do that on the surface in terms of their, how their cars were, or how their training was for their drivers, etc. So you could say that they didn't really understand, they didn't know that they were about to see a disruptor in their market, and they didn't know what impact that was going to have. This last one is the most difficult, because it's as it says, right? It's the things I know, I don't know. So it's automatically difficult. But I'd still try to look at that in your business. And by the way, these apply for businesses of any size, whether you have 5 employees, 500, or 500,000 employees. These three apply regardless. And so I really encourage you to make that list, because it's going to drive what you already know within the measurements metrics of ROI for your customer experience program. And by the way, it's going to help you better understand your business. And it might sound strange to walk away from this webinar and somebody says to you, so how's the webinar? And say, well, I learned about known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and get this strange look. But again, it's a really good place to take an inventory of your business, to take an inventory of your customer experience, and to understand then what do I need to do. And this will immediately start showing you gaps. I'm sure you've heard about journey mapping and so forth. And that's a great tool as well, but this is an initial way to say, I've got some gaps here, or I'm doing some things really well, but there's some things I'm not doing well, and I better understand those. So Donald Rumsfeld's known knowns absolutely applies into the measurements metrics in CX. So let's do a little bit of a background check on where we're at, the state of CX right now, state of metrics. So this is a fairly old chart. It's 7 years old, but what I would say to you is that it probably hasn't changed much, unfortunately, in the last 7 years. And what is this saying is, a group of businesses were asked, and they said, 93% wish to be considered a CX leader in their industry. So, who doesn't want to be a leader? The other 7% either don't want to be or didn't answer the question. So 91% of the survey respondents said, hey, I want to be a leader in CX. I mean, it's a little bit like mom and apple pie, right? We want to do that. Yet 37% are just getting started with a formal initiative. So look at that, less than half are just getting started with an initiative around their customer experience, and only 20% consider their CX initiative advanced. So that's a substantial drop from, here's what I want to be a leader, but I haven't started, or I'm in the very early stages of starting to address the customer experience. So businesses really have to act to avoid falling behind. And I relate this typically to when the smartphones were coming on the scene and companies were not staying in tune with bringing their websites and so forth onto the smartphone applications. This is the same thing. Your competition is thinking this, whether you believe that or not. Your competition is looking at their customer experience, and you have to as well. And so if you're in that left-hand box where you want to be a leader, but you're in the middle box where you haven't really gotten started or just getting underway, it's something to consider. Just a reminder, we're getting a little bit of background noise, so if you would mute your phone, I would appreciate it. And then we could also, and use the chat for questions, that'd be great. And we'll have time at the end for Q&A as well. So why is this important? Why do we even want to talk about customer experience and the ROI? And who cares? I'm trying to get product out the door. I'm trying to get the trucks on the road. I'm trying to get my product manufactured. I'm trying to get raw materials. I've got all these things going on. I've got all these business priorities. Why does this matter? Now you're asking me to focus on customer experience. I mean, forget about it, right? But the reality is that we're seeing institutional investors look for firms that have positive changes in their customer experience. They're starting to ask those, they're not starting, they have been asking those questions about, how are you addressing changing customer expectations? The word of mouth rates and the net promoter scores, which we'll talk towards the end, is also a factor with how customers view the importance of customer experience. And then when customers felt the company had made a mistake, 67% were willing to forgive them and repurchase if they had a positive recovery. 9%, only 9% if they had a poor experience. So think about that. We're going to make mistakes, and when mistakes happen, it's all about how fast we recover from those mistakes. Do we have a process in place to do that? And if we do, customers are going to respond favorably to us in continuing to buy from us and recommend us. So customers are willing to give us a little leeway, but make the same mistake twice, and they're not going to. So these are factors that drive why it's important that we invest in our customer experience. And by the way, I want to make sure that we are on the same page here. When I say invest in customer experience, I'm meaning more than your customer service department. I look at this very holistically across all of the functions within your business. And so that's really important to keep in mind too, that we're not just talking about, if customer service would answer the phone faster, we'd have a better customer experience. This is much broader than that and much more impactful than that. It starts with how you prospect to customers. It starts about your delivery times, which we'll talk about. It talks about how the product is presented. It talks about recovery that we just talked about. It's every step in the customer process of working with you. Now, here are some of the issues that we face in terms of hurdles for our business and investing. Hey, we have short-term results focused rather than long-term gains. If you're in or have worked in a publicly held company, this is much more prevalent in terms of achieving quarterly results. If you're in privately owned companies, there's still an obligation to the owners or to the investors to achieve the results that you've committed to. So there tends to be a focus on short-term results rather than long-term gains, and that can have a negative impact on our ability to invest in CX, because investments in CX are long-term. This is not something you're going to do this afternoon and see return on investment tomorrow. You're going to see we used to say it has a long tail on it, because the investment really takes time to root and then grow and retain customers. Also, the lack of a defining and measuring customer experience to demonstrate the impact. So what that means is we spend a little bit too much time, perhaps as customer experience professionals, talking about, well, we have to do this. I mean, it's customer experience. Don't we want customers to be happy? But we don't back that up with real type language and information that we can talk to executives about or owners about in terms of, when we make this investment, this is what's going to happen. Remember that investors and owners and executives and boards are all used to seeing somebody talk to them in terms of, we're going to spend $1 million on this piece of equipment and we're going to get a $10 million return over a 5-year ROI, and here's the profitability and here's the margin. It's very succinct, it's very easy to understand. They can question the numbers and they can say yes or no, that it achieves the company's objectives or it doesn't. We have to do that in customer experience as well. We can't just say, we have to improve the customer experience because they're our customers. We have to say, here's what we're going to do, and we'll talk about this in a minute. And then also, we are challenged to navigate the political landscape to gain executive sponsorship. I mean, this is the reality of what we're faced with. And sometimes we have to be savvy leaders as well to understand the political situation that we're in, the reality situation that we're in, and align our customer experience. So what you might be gathering from me is that I'm probably not considered a purist around customer experience. I'm willing to flex the programs, flex the initiatives, understand the investments needed, but being sensitive to the business needs at the time and balancing the two. And I think, I'm sure there are customer experience colleagues out there that would disagree with me, but I think this sensitivity to balancing the business needs with the investment in customer experience is really an important aspect of the whole concept of ROI. So why is measurement critical? I mean, I had to include Drucker in this presentation, right? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so if we're not measuring anything right now, and again, here's where I'm not necessarily a purist. I work with clients and individuals that oftentimes don't have the money to do a full-blown survey of their customers, or they might have a relatively small customer base that produces a significant amount of revenue. They don't have thousands, they don't have, consumer type databases with hundreds of thousands of customers. They have smaller type customer bases, maybe 500 or 1,000 customers. So you can't really survey them every month. You can't survey them every 6 months. They'll get survey fatigue. So we have to look at other ways to gain that information and understand the voice of the customer. And I'll give you some examples of that, but for this purpose, I think it's important to emphasize that looking for those different opportunities is really important. How can we hear the voice of the customer if we don't have a lot of money to invest? You might talk to salespeople in the field. You might talk to customer service. You might talk to your customers directly and say, how are we doing? I've been in situations and working with companies where I've said, I'm just going to call our top 10 customers. Let me just talk to them and see how it's going. And they complain sometimes. They said how wonderful we were sometimes, but 100% of the time they said, I'm really appreciative that somebody picked up the phone and said, wow, how's it going? I just thought I'd check in with you. And so I think that's something to keep in mind too. Again, not a purist view on surveying, but it still accomplishes what we're trying to in terms of the CX investment. If you needed more data or information to prove the case for an ROI, here it is. I mean, this is the Watermark Consulting study. It's a very respected consulting company. Watermark is a very respected consulting company in this space, and they've been tracking for 11 years stock performance. And you can see CX leaders are outperforming laggards. And I think it's really, this study is really exemplary about how making investments can make a difference. There's another one around employee investments, which frankly hasn't been updated lately, but we can't overlook the importance of investing in our employees as well, who are delivering the customer experience for us. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so I want to share this model with you because I always think it's important to give you something tangible that you can use when you walk away from these webinars. You're investing an hour of your time. What is it that I can use? And this is a model. I did not invent this model. This is a model by John Goodman. Customer Experience 3.0 is a great book if you've got a chance to read it, and any of his publications are quite good. So I pulled this model out because, and this is not a math webinar, so I'm not going to go into the details of it, but I'm going to give you a high-level overview because it's pretty easy to take this model on a legal pad and write down and fill in your information and come up with a similar result in very short order. So let's go through it real quick. There's 3 slides I want to share with you with this revenue risk model. So let's talk first. Let's start on the left-hand side of the chart. 200,000 customers have problems. Now remember, this is probably a consumer environment, so don't get nervous that all of those customers have problems. But let's say 200,000 have customers. Again, you fill in that number. 25% complain and 75% don't complain. So I know I've got 200,000 customers with problems. Now, you might say to me, how do I know that I have that? Well, you might know that you made shipping errors, or you might know that a product is backlogged, or you might know that that the product part number is now obsolete and you have to get a new product number, and the part isn't exactly the same. There could be ways internally that you can know that, and you can also estimate to some extent to say, by extrapolating how many are actually complaining, I can also look at it looks like I'm getting about 1 error per 200,000. Is that correct? So again, don't get too caught up in making sure you've got the exact number. Do your best guesstimating at what the numbers are, and I think you'll be quite successful. So looking at the top line, we say 25% are complaining, 50% are satisfied, 30% feel appeased, and 20% were dissatisfied. So following the chart along, the repurchasing rates you can see go down based on what the customer's view is of how you satisfied their issue. And the not complaining, about 75% repurchase. So you could say, as a starting point, of the 200,000 customers with problems, approximately 46,000 are customers at risk. So just stop there for a minute and think about, could I determine how many customers are at risk? So once you've done that, you can say, all right, let's just change the numbers a little bit. So now let's suggest that we change our customer experience and we try to promote people to complain. We encourage them to tell us, hey, if we haven't done a good job, what can we do to help you? And so I won't try to do this too much flipping and make you all dizzy, but the previous one we had 75-25. Now we've got 60-40. So 60 are not complaining, but 40% are. And by the way, again, I apologize for flipping back and forth, we're getting a better result. We're getting better satisfaction, appeasement, and dissatisfaction. So we're getting higher repurchasing amounts. So now what did we do? We took 46,000 customers down to 41,200 customers at risk. Now, if we assume that their annual revenue is $1,000 per customer, you can see the calculation in the lower right-hand corner that there's a substantial savings that we've realized in revenue and profit by changing the complaint process. And in this case, we're using the example which says we got more calls, that cost us more money, but at the same time, we were able to reduce the churn. And I'll give you one final chart to consider. Now, oops, sorry, apologize. If we, just give me a moment here. I'm not sure why we're getting a little problem here. There we go. Now, if we reduce the number of customers with problems, so okay, we started with 200,000. Now, if we reduce the actual numbers with problems because we're investing in our customer experience, we're changing the way we do things, we're changing our shipping or our products and so forth, we still get a higher complaint, but the problems were prevented in the first place. So as you might imagine, there are more charts to go with this, and then the subsequent charts change the way we do the complaints, just like we did on the previous chart. But again, now we take the risk down to 34,500 customers. So we've reduced substantially the amount of customers that we're involved with, and it's a way to then say, wow, look at the money we're delivering to the bottom line. The ROI of this is 187%. It's worth the investment. Now we're talking like a CFO would expect us to talk like when we're asking for these kinds of investments. Again, John Goodman model, customer experience 3.0, lots more detail with this. But it's, to me, it's a great working opportunity to demonstrate the benefit of an ROI. We also have to look at how we position our strategy statements. So what I've seen oftentimes is that strategy statements are too vague. I mean, let's face it, everybody says we want to look out for our customers, we want to satisfy our customers. It's kind of, you know, the vision, mission, and goals we have, you know, on our walls and on our bulletin boards at our offices, right? But we need it to be different when it comes to customer experience. If we're going to ask for investments, we need to be very specific about what we're going to do. So those previous charts that you saw really indicate that we need to reduce churn, and this is what we're going to do, and this is the result. We're going to reduce inbound calls by 3%, and this is going to produce a resulting improvement in customer service. And 90% of emails are answered within 4 hours. I really encourage you to set very specific targets in these areas to help improve. There's another one we don't often talk about, and that's customer lifetime value. And we used to talk about this all the time 10 or 15 years ago, but we don't hear about it a lot anymore. But this is another really important tool to look at. What is the value of customers for you over their lifetime, and is that an opportunity for investment? And if you lose customers, you know, it's the same story we've heard before. If you lose customers, it's much more expensive to acquire them than to retain them. So I share this with you as just an indicator that customer lifetime value is also a very important measurement that can help us understand why we should invest in customer experience. And then I have to kind of share this with you. And in many of the presentations I do on supply chain, this is the main topic of the supply chain type sessions that I conduct. But we're all being compared to Amazon. Whether we're in the online market business or not, we're being compared to Amazon. Can we get it there overnight within a few hours? Do they have a whole raft of products for me? Can people understand exactly what I'm looking for in terms of the products I want to purchase? It's something we're all being compared to, and like it or not, we have to consider that as part of our investment process. So keep the Amazon effect in mind when you're looking at how do you design your CX. Not that they're the model and only model to follow, but that you're measured against that model. I want to share with you a brief case study that demonstrates how investment in CX really matters, because I always think it's important to add the reality to the concepts we've been talking about. And in this case, it's a discussion about, or a case study about, Home Depot and soil. And all of us can relate to the fact that in Minnesota we have a short growing season, and that impedes our ability to grow things quickly and get results of our harvest. And so I'm a master gardener with the University of Minnesota, and I like this particular kind of soil because it's high nutrient, high concentrate, and it works really well in containers and almost as a self-fertilizer. So I went into Home Depot and said to them, hey, I want this soil. And the individual said to me, we don't carry that anymore. Nobody ever bought it. I said, okay, whatever. I'm disappointed by that. But I actually called Home Depot Atlanta headquarters, and I said to the individual there, got a hold of the VP of procurement for soil and said to them, you know what, I'm disappointed that this happened, and left them a voicemail message. And a couple of days later, I got a call back from this individual, and he said, why do you like this soil so much? I told him why. He hung up the phone. He called me back a couple hours later, and he said, we're going to have this soil delivered to your house so you can utilize it, and by the distributor. And then, believe it or not, a year later, he called me and said, we've got the soil. We know where you work because of your email address, and so we found out that we've got that soil again for you at a local Home Depot if you want to pick it up. I mean, this was pretty amazing things that were happening, that over one bag of soil. Now, I found out later that there were a fair number of complaints about not carrying this soil, and it turns out maybe I was the straw that broke the camel's back. But the reality is that I knew something was happening within Home Depot that was different than I had heard before. And so I investigated it after this experience with getting the soil and asked them, what happened here? What was your transition to move from what a lot of people would used to say was terrible at Home Depot? You could shoot a cannon through the aisles and not hit anybody. If you did find somebody, they weren't experienced enough to answer your questions. So there was this shift that was going on. And Home Depot said, this is all direct from Home Depot, said, you know, this is what was happening to us. We were riding the real estate boom of the 2000s. We were growing as fast as we could. Our earnings statements were covering up a lot of underlying problems, and we just weren't staffed properly. We were centralizing everything, and it just wasn't going the way it should go for us. And we were looking good, but there was, you know, storm clouds on the horizon. So they brought in new leadership, and they took this approach around simplification in their stores, no strategic flavors of the quarter. They removed tasks from leaders so leaders could be on the floor working retail. They put more people in the aisles, and by the way, they put people in the aisles that were very experienced because they've been laid off from the financial crisis and the real estate bubble that had burst. And so they went out and found former carpenters and plumbers and electricians, and now you could, you know, take a picture of a problem in your house, you could bring it in, show it to them, and they could fix it for you. So it was really a significant shift from what they had been doing. No offense to the youth of the country, but the experienced contractors really knew how to help you and get you the parts you needed. So it was a significant shift that they said, look, we can invest in our employees, we can invest in our customers, and we can grow all at the same time. And they even proclaim that on their website in terms of their core values, their inverted pyramid, and their three-legged stool, which in their case, the three-legged stool is about customer experience as one leg, product authority, and an internal evaluation around capital allocation. So I give you this example to show that I hear it all the time is, you know, I can't ask for money that's going to take 2 or 3 years to get back. I'm of the moment right now. I'm trying to get the capital allocations and investments I need, and I just can't wait for 2 or 3 years. And yeah, Home Depot is a huge conglomerate that can really, you know, afford some of this. But keep in mind, their margins are slim, and they really had to make a commitment to grow the business by investing in customers and employees. Again, it's an example I think we can learn from because of what they attempted to do. And, you know, here are the results. I mean, I won't go through these in detail, but, you know, sales are up, earnings are up. I mean, everything is going in the direction for the past few years, and every indicator that they have is going up. And so I think it really points to the importance of making this investment. And of course, there are many, many other examples of that. And I would suggest that the three-legged stool looks somewhat like this. It's around people, process, and tools. We all know that it's really important for us to understand those three legs of the stool. So if we do something with our people, how is that impacting our process and tools, and vice versa? If we look at tools and we don't do something with people and process, we won't be as successful. I was involved in a company a few years ago that installed a CRM platform because they wanted their salespeople to to prospect 1 day a week. So account management for 4 days, prospect for 1 day. So 20% of the time they wanted them to do that. And at the time they installed this a CRM, they were doing like 0 or very low, 1 or 2%. And so we put all this CRM in place, and we looked at the results, and the company's problem was they said they're still not, salespeople aren't prospecting. Well, we didn't look at the people and the process components of this stool, because we found out is when we were brought in to investigate is that salespeople actually liked having 1 day, Fridays, not having to be in the office, being at their home, being able to kind of recover from the week, do their filing, you know, do their notes on their account manager. They didn't want to prospect. And by the way, they weren't trained to to prospect. So that was forgotten. And so we installed a fantastic tool. We didn't consider the people component, and that ultimately was the problem. Once that changed, it made a significant difference for us. So I want to shift gears for just a minute, having tried to give you some background on the overall CX investments and the methodology for how we do that, to how do we measure it now. So if we've made the decision that we want to invest in CX, and we've gotten agreement from executive leadership that that's what we want to do, how do we measure it? How do we prove that we've been successful in providing this investment a return? Whatever it is, if it's technology, if it's process management changes, if it's training our people, if it's enhancing the way our people do work, whatever it is, we want to understand and be able to report back to our leadership that you gave me this much money, I made this investment, and here's what the result is. So let's spend a couple of minutes on that. First, there are 3 types of CX metrics: descriptive, perceptive, and outcome. Now, this is not a course on customer experience surveying and so forth, and so I just want to give you a flavor for it. But these 3 measurements are really kind of key. It's what happened, what do customers feel and think about the experience, and then what's going to happen in the future. And I just want to emphasize that middle perceptive box. We don't always think about that with our customers. Sometimes we think about, well, this is what happened and this is what we did to change it. But what was the customer feeling? Was this a gift? Was this, you know, they had to have it in order, they had to have this part in order to fulfill their customer order, and we didn't get it to them on time? Was this something that we had to provide to their employees that we failed to get on time? Whatever it is, the perception really makes a difference. So I want to emphasize to you that that's really important to look at that in your analysis of your customer experience. And this is a high-level overview for you to consider: is where do you get those metrics? So where do I get the descriptive metrics? Where do I get the perceptive? And what's the outcome? How do I measure that? So where are the sources of this data? Again, you don't need to do tons and tons of measurements and data analysis. In fact, one of the problems we have today is we're getting so much data in that we don't know what to do with it, and we don't do anything with it. So if you're collecting data for the sake of collecting data and you're not doing anything with it, then stop collecting it. Or focus your data collection on one area so that you can really make an impact on improving that particular area. I know it's running counter to what you're hearing and reading about in terms of data collection, but seriously, if you're not doing anything with the data, stop collecting it and then focus in and do something with what you are collecting. And this is just a high-level view of what a voice of customer program might look like. So here's where we get the metric, here's where we get the information, right? But there's also this component of a voice of customer program that you have to consider. And some of this is driven by the size of your company. So if you have a company with 100,000 customers, you're going to do things differently than if you're a company with 500 customers. And like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, it makes a difference in how you structure your voice of customers. So do you have the ability to talk to 10 or 15 customers? I mean, pick up the phone and call them. Have some of your executives do it. If you're the executives in charge, why are you talking to customers? I'm amazed at the number of times where I ask executives of companies and say, when was the last time you talked to a customer? I get a lot of blank stares. And if they have, it's usually because it's a complaint. Sometimes it's just good for executives to call customers. So what I'm pointing out here is, again, this is not a class on customer surveying, but you got to build a program that fits exactly what works for your company. Excuse me, there are a lot of methods out there. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but you really need to have it work for you and your company. So take the best of all the things you read about and see in webinars like this and say, how do I apply that to my company? And build a representation like that for you. These are some of the ways we measure customer experience, and many of these you've heard. Of course, the first three drive the fourth one, so satisfaction, willingness to return, and willingness to recommend drive the Net Promoter Score. Some people only survey customer satisfaction and not the other three. Again, what fits for you may not fit for everyone, and vice versa. So consider that. Net Promoter Score is very popular. Again, it's a situation that you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money on it and perhaps not get the results that you're looking for. The Customer Experience Index is a Forrester index, and that's a little bit different. I'll show it to you briefly. And then the Customer Effort Score says, how much time did I spend trying to get this done with your company? Place an order, solve a problem, check where my product is. Did I have to put a lot of effort forward to do that? And they'll give us a score on that. I want to mention CXI. I'm not going to talk a lot about NPS because many of you might be familiar with it. It's certainly the more popular measurement. But CXI is interesting. And again, I'm not here to promote Forrester or Bain or anybody. I just think this is an interesting measurement index because it talks about, was it enjoyable, was it easy, and did it meet my needs? A little bit different than satisfaction, willingness to recommend, and willingness to continue using. It brings that emotional EQ into the process, and it brings that perception into the process. So if you're looking at ways to measure within your company, I'd say consider this as a possibility. And again, Customer Effort Score says, did I have to put a lot of effort forward in order to complete my transaction with you? Now, what I'd say is pick one. There are tons of things out there. There are plenty of people out there that can help you with this, but if you're measuring nothing right now, pick one. Maybe it's you call the top 20 customers you have and talk to them. Hey, that's fantastic. You know, take that step. Don't worry about boiling the ocean right now, but take the step to start the measurement if you haven't yet. And then I want to leave you with this prior to our Q&A session. How do we connect all these dots? So we've talked about, you know, the reasons why we should make these investments. We talked about how do we measure once we made the investment. Well, how does this all come together? And this is what I talked about at the very beginning, is a dashboard around customer experience performance. In the upper right-hand corner, you see the customer, right? NPS is what we talked about, customer SAT, customer effort score, the customer experience index. A lot of companies only measure that upper right quadrant and call it their customer experience results. I'm not an advocate of that. What I'm an advocate of is measuring the entire view of your company, measuring how your employees feel things are, what are your operational metrics, what are your financial metrics, and then your customer, and combine those in a very succinct, clear dashboard that everybody understands, that then you can say, okay, now here's how we're performing as a company. This is what makes a difference for us. finally, the language I talked about earlier is really important as well. Use C-suite language that they're used to hearing if you're going to make these investments. Declare and defend your request by being specific. Again, this is what we talked about. What's the measurement I'm going to improve? Don't look so much at pie in the sky, mom, apple pie, all that kind of stuff, but how do we make a real change on the ground right now? What are the benchmarks you're going to use to support your forecast? And then what's the compelling story that you're going to tell about how to support the organization's strategic vision? So what have we talked about today? Start with the known knowns, right? Take an inventory of what you already know, establish the benchmarks to support investments, be specific about that investment and what it will do to the performance of the organization, declare and defend your proposals, establish a closed loop system of data collection. If you're not going to do anything with the data, stop collecting it. Look for champions that share your passion and try to build momentum within your organization. The language we talked about, the voice of customer process to drive the continued investments in CX, celebrate the quick wins and build momentum to prove your business case. These are elements that can help you in the investment part and then track and report your progress that can justify future investments. Last but not least, I always ask that everybody do the same thing. What would your customers say about this product, service, policy, or practice? What do your employees think about it? And then what's one thing you could do in your role to create a better customer experience? So with that, I will turn this back over to Steve and see if we have any questions. I'll be happy to answer, and thanks for everyone's attention today as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. That was great. Yeah, if anyone has questions to submit, feel free to use the chat function. I've got a few here. You know, Bob, many of our manufacturers are smaller businesses, often family-owned. Often the owners also operator. If they've got salespeople, designated salespeople, oftentimes they're from a technical background and they aren't necessarily trained in sales. Customer service is often the receptionist slash operator slash accounts payable. Any recommendations for how a small company like that can get creative about how they're doing CX when they don't necessarily have a customer service department of sorts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I see that quite a bit, and there's where I think there's opportunities. So your salespeople in the field are hearing things all the time, right? They're saying, they're hearing about the products, they're hearing about how you're delivering, they're telling you how well you're doing things. So that could be a source. So you probably have in smaller companies, you still probably have regular management meetings where you can draw that voice in, where you can talk about, what's the sales group hearing? Or, hey, I talked to a customer the other day and they said this. Now, should you change the entire direction of the company just based on what one customer said? No, I'm not suggesting that. But I think you draw that information in, even as a smaller company, with whatever source you have, and that can be a benefit to you. And then the other thing I would say too is, I think what's really important is talk to customers. I mean, in small organizations, you're all busy, you're all doing all things all the time, but you still have to wedge some time in there to talk to your customers. And like I said, a lot of times, even putting 10 minutes on your calendar to say, I'm going to call this customer today and see how we're doing, will go a long way for that customer and go a long way for you. And if you do enough of those across a number of people, you'll get the information you need and be able to take action. That's where I say, Steve, I'm not a purist in some of this.
Sure.
I can hear my CX professionals everywhere kind of cringing, saying, no, you need a formal program, you can't do that. But in small companies, it's just not realistic. I mean, I work with a company that wants to do a full-blown NPS, but I keep telling them, I think it's great, but you're going to spend a lot of money for an NPS, and the value you get from that is not going to pay back. It's just too much investment for not enough information.
So how, CXPA has, as an organization, has exploded growth-wise around the world, and there's a lot of excitement around that, but it doesn't seem like manufacturers necessarily have that same mindset. I mean, I think from my experience, we typically think inside our four walls and think operationally. We don't necessarily get into the marketing mindset. We don't necessarily think, proactively about, the customer experience and the voice of the customer. Any idea why that is, or how manufacturers can maybe think differently about kind of looking at CX as a focal point?
Well, the first thing I'd probably say is that manufacturers are not the only people that aren't thinking about this all the time. So, but I would say, it goes to my earlier point where we're trying to get product out the door, right? Or we're trying to get product in the front door so we can send it out the back door. So our priorities within our organizations as manufacturers are trying to, make or produce the product and get it to our customers on a timely basis. And we don't always think about this component of customer experience. And, in the CXPA, we have CX professionals, but we also have lots and lots of practitioners that are out there on the front lines trying to improve the customer experience. So the suggestion I have for manufacturers would be, think about, ask your employees, ask your leaders, where your problems are. You'll know almost consistently, and I've done this a number of times, where I'll ask a group of 10 people and I'll say, what's the sorry about the noise in the back. What are the top 10 issues that you have in the organization right now? And people rattle them off like that, and you say, well, what are you doing about it? Well, nothing. It's just the way it is. So I'd say for manufacturers, that's really important to consider. Talk about it at a meeting, gather that information, and take the small steps. You don't have to do a full-blown CX investment. You could say, you know what? Let's focus on correcting this one problem. And I'll give you an example. There's a manufacturer that has consistently heard from customers that you never tell us if the shipment is delayed. You tell us we've ordered it, you've confirmed the order, you send us an email that you're getting ready to produce it, but you never tell us if there's a delay in the order. We just don't know. It doesn't show up on our dock, and it's supposed to. And everybody universally in the organization knew that. Well, that's what we focused on. And when we changed that, you can't believe the amount of customer feedback we got that said, oh, thank God you finally changed that problem. We love you even more than we did before. One problem that took maybe a couple of days worth of work, and the customer was very happy.
All right, well, I've got one more question here, unless anyone has any additional questions to submit. So just kind of flipping the table a little bit, I call on businesses often, whether they're customers or members of MPMA, and sometimes I get a bad experience from my standpoint. I'm not necessarily the customer, but just maybe a peer, maybe actually a customer of someone I'm calling on, and the person that answers the phone gives me a very poor customer experience. And I feel like if I were in their shoes, I would want to know that my person was not really doing a good job with the customer experience. Do you have any recommendations for people who are on that side of it, and without necessarily it being a complaint? And again, it's not necessarily the customer who's buying a product. I don't feel obligated to complain, but any way that you think somebody can respectfully and proactively reach out to a company to say, hey, my experience wasn't great. It's not a complaint. I'm just trying to help you out.
I think it's a great question. I'd say, almost every company's website has a contact us section. And that's what I would use, because, we used to say, I can't fix something I don't know anything about. So if there's a bad experience that's happening and I don't know about it, it's very difficult for me to fix that. So one of the opportunities you have is, like you said, it's not really a complaint per se. It just wasn't handled as well, or I just happened to be asking for some information and it didn't go very well, is to use that contact us on the website and fill it out. Funny you bring this up, because this is a business to consumer situation, but I kept getting these promotions from this company, and it would say 25% off everything on the site and free shipping. And so I'd say, oh, this is fantastic, a great sale. So I'd go onto the site to order it, and it would be an asterisk next to the 25% that said 25% off everything over once you buy $75, and then you'll get free shipping. Well, that's not what, so I finally got tired of getting these promotions, and I wrote them a contact us, and I said, leave that asterisk off or stop sending me the promotion. So it wasn't a situation where it was a bad product or I got a delay. It was just like it was a promotional issue. And to the company's credit, they responded. Now, they didn't change their approach, but at least they responded and said, we understand, we'll pass it along. And that's what we want, right? We want that closed loop system from customers.
I know I've had a few experiences where I am truly trying to help a company, a local pizza place that I loved going to, but I definitely saw that quality go down. I thought, well, I'll just let them know because I would prefer them to fix it so I can keep going there. And so I sent them a message, and they never responded, and I've never gone back since. So
right. And you know what? In B2B environments, it's the same thing. How do we thought that we were bothering customers by sending these emails about the status of their order, and yet the customer was saying, why aren't you sending me status, emails with the status of my order? So you have to understand the expectations, and again, you got to solicit that feedback to get people to tell you what's going right and what's going wrong.
Well, this has been great, Bob. I really appreciate you joining us and providing us some great insights. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and hope you all are doing well and staying healthy and staying busy, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.